Jessica's a former patient who now does a lot of public speaking about this, and Dr. Axelbank treats TMS patients. Do you have any questions?
A very strange thing happened about 6 months ago, and all the way through this movie I was thinking, wow, there is me, a very small amount of pain, nothing looks bad, but in the backs of my legs, I'm a walker, I'm a runner, all of a sudden I have this tension, I can barely climb the stairs. So I'm thinking perhaps that's part of what you're talking about.
Yeah, so the question is a statement. 6 months ago, he had some...
And still have.
And still has, well, not for much longer, but he had some tightness in back here in the back of his legs. Right. And during the movie, he thought, oh, maybe that's what this is. And do you have a comment on that?
Well, I think maybe you have the answer.
Yeah.
And you just
I'd like to come and see you if that was possible.
Yeah.
We can talk.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a good idea to see somebody, good idea to read the book. But I think the really simple thing that Dr. Sarno would say is, when that happens, think emotionally rather than physically. Because what happens oftentimes is the amygdala starts to go into the fear cycle, and so then it just perpetuates itself. But if you say, what's really going on? What's this thing that I'm not dealing with? And then, because sometimes, like, there's different ways of framing it, right? The whole movie is about framing. But maybe you're framing it as, it's this physical problem, but then the other answer might be, oh, maybe it's just that it's fear. And fear that I'm going to feel this feeling.
Can I ask one
Yes.
follow-up? And I hate it when people ask two questions.
Yes, you can.
But the interesting thing was, when this began to happen, I also became more or less an insomniac, waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
So what is going on in your life? That's the question. And
Well,
You don't have to tell us.
Don't.
Thank
Right.
you. Thank you.
Any other
But are they
questions?
connected? Perhaps.
Definitely.
Thank you.
How do you treat TMS? I mean, do you treat it psychologically or do you treat it some other way?
As a psychologist,
Psychologist.
I treat it psychologically.
It's also about information. It's also treated culturally, because if we're not allowed to feel these things, then it happens. So I'm going to pass it to you to speak about that and why you do what you do.
Right, I actually treated it myself. Once I heard about Dr. Sarno's work, and a friend recommended that I read one of his books, one of his 4 books, Healing Back Pain. I got better in the time it took me to get halfway through the book. So because I was so shocked that the 20 doctors in nearly every field that I was seeing for my 20 plus chronic symptoms that had me crippled to the point where I used to be a professional dancer and aerialist, I couldn't walk, let alone I was too unhealthy for surgery. I needed multiple surgeries for back, hip, intestines, but I couldn't get them because I was having what they thought were heart attacks and seizures. It became overwhelming. But a friend said, you really need to read this book. I read it, and I started having nearly every symptom at once. While lying down, one moment I was fine, next moment I feel like, oh my God, I'm having a heart attack, and my back's out, and then I'm dizzy, and wait a minute. What changed between 10 seconds ago to now? I'm thinking about the fact that I had a steroid epidural injection with no relief, and I'm upset about it. And he's saying in this book that that doesn't have good statistical benefits, and I'm angry about it. And that's why I have 20 symptoms at once in bed. Poof, it went away. I was so shocked that now I'm bringing the information forward with a web series online, Got Pain Cured, just search it on YouTube, because the information itself helps people get better. So even if you don't get to see a doctor like wonderful Dr. Axelbank, you can just get better through knowledge.
When he talks about autoimmune disease, he says, well, you need to deal with that physically because of the effects that it can have. But I'm just wondering if the doctor has any opinion about relationship of autoimmune disease with Dr. Sarno's beliefs.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the more controversial or questions that comes up. There's a lot of autoimmune diseases, type 1 diabetes, which is actually was the trigger for my TMS, because my daughter got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and then next thing I knew, I had a back spasm, and anyway, we can go into that more, but I actually don't really have an answer. I think that there's probably some relationship between the immune system and your emotions. I don't know that we understand it quite completely. But one thing I would say is that it never really hurts to think psychologically and not physically. And so if something is happening, think about what's going on in your life.
It's always extremely important to get anything physical ruled out by a doctor. So for me, even without seeing a doctor that practices in TMS specifically, I had everything else ruled out already with multiple colonoscopies, endoscopies. My dad died of colon cancer when I was 20. Right after that, I started having intense colon pain. For 6 years, this developed into intense colon bleeding, and they thought I might need a resection, or doctors were saying, you might have colon cancer, but it's fine. I didn't really take it to be that it was fine. It certainly didn't feel that way, and fear is a huge element with this. And then I actually ended up being diagnosed with Crohn's disease after a CT scan showed specific findings. Yep, you have Crohn's disease. Well, it's completely gone now because all of the stress and tension is gone. But that being said, it's all kind of different depending on the person. Definitely rule out any condition, but it does get worse when you add stress and components into that. And like you said, with the mimicking symptoms when a family member has a health issue, and then I started mimicking symptoms of colon cancer because of the loss of my dad, that really plays into it. And your immune system is entirely connected to your emotions and your intestines, so.
And there's two doctors that you hear from in the movie. One is Dr. David Clark, who wrote the book called They Can't Find Anything Wrong, who has 7,000 cases dealing with gastroenterology that he dealt with. So that's his field, was gastroenterology. And he didn't believe this at first, and then when he started talking to the patients, he just kind of discovered it because of his own practice. And then there's Gabor Mate, who wrote the book called When the Body Says No. And he does very specifically tie it to all the autoimmune diseases. He's got lots of studies that basically, he says the studies are out there, but they go into the Bermuda Triangle because they're not accepted by the community. And you see this with so many different things in medicine. Anyone here heard of Robert Lustig and his kind of studies on sugar? He's basically tied sugar to heart disease. Everything he discovered was already done by another guy named Yudkin in the late 50s and early 60s, but then Eisenhower's doctor said, no, it's all fat, and those were just forgotten. So he did these studies, and he presented them and said, Yudkin already did that, but it was forgotten. So a lot of these things exist, but if they don't fit the paradigm of the time, they get forgotten.
What was the name of the first doctor you mentioned?
Dr. David Clark.
This is less of a question, more a clarification. So you can have like structural abnormalities or like tendon tears or ligament tears, but it's like basically the body should be able to handle these things, but
Yeah.
I think Dr. Sarno would point out that, and the science points out that a ligament tear is different than a herniation. A herniation shows up as an abnormality, but it actually doesn't. There's a lot of data that shows they don't really correlate. But as he says in the movie, if you tore your Achilles tendon, then it should heal at a certain point. It'll hurt when you've torn it, and you can probably bring down the pain by being conscious of what's going on and however you deal with pain. But then the body does have the ability to heal itself. So there shouldn't be pain continuing unless that's where maybe it chooses to stay and to distract your attention.
Yeah, I would want to add that there's a difference between acute pain and chronic pain. When you have acute pain, it's because of an injury. And actually, recently there have been functional MRIs of brains, and the places in the brain that light up for acute pain is different from the places that light up in the brain that's for chronic pain. And it turns out that the places that light up for chronic pain are the emotional centers of the brain. So if you have an injury and you have acute pain, usually it heals in maximum 4 to 6 months. If you have pain after that shift, they actually see the shift in the brain MRIs, functional MRIs, and the part of the brain that lights up shifts when it changes from acute to chronic pain.
As also was shown in the documentary, some statistics about how many people have herniated discs without pain and how many people have pain with herniated discs. I have 4 levels of herniated discs, 2 cervical, 2 lumbar, completely torn cartilage in both hips, torn cartilage in both knees, stress fractures in both feet, and I'm fine. I haven't needed painkillers in over 2 years since I read Sarno's book. I could go back to dancing, but now I'm more passionate about pursuing this because it's such a hard endeavor to do and why more people need to see this documentary. But so if that gives anyone hope that there's a difference between the abnormalities and damage.
And bring up a very good point. So if we had time for one more question, but first I'm going to tell you that, you know, in order for other people to see this movie, we have to do really well here at the theater this weekend. So I'm tasking each one of you with getting 3 people here either later today or tomorrow.
Or Sunday.
Or the next day, because we basically have to have 1,000 people here, 1,500 people this weekend to get any other theater to book it. Because there's a lot of resistance to these ideas, and frankly, there's a lot of resistance to people being present with their emotions. You know, there were 2 reviews of the movie, and both of them were pretty much bent on shaming me for being in the movie and being present in the movie. And it's just like this kind of unconscious thing that you're not, you know, that's not interesting. Why should you be in the movie? You're just a schmuck. Like, we want to hear more about this guy who, you know, we wanted to make the movie about, but there had to be a balance between kind of the ideas and the emotions. And the emotions were not in his story, in that he was willing to be, like, wanted to be out there emotionally. So we had to find a way to make it a movie.
Freud said, there's nothing so fearful as self-knowledge.
Yeah.
One more question, and then we have to let the next showing come in.
How important is it to have a specific knowledge about the nature of the rage, you know, the source, like when in childhood it happened, who was involved, or is it enough to just know that that rage exists?
I think it depends. If you can be pain-free by just knowing I must be angry at something, great. My experience is that usually you need to go more into it.
And everybody has their different path, and at the different time when they're ready to hear different information. And, you know, one thing that Dr. Sklar continued on to say is that, you know, he tells another story that's on our website, it's on our Facebook page, All the Rage, and we also have alltheragedoc.com. But he says, you know, when he was in medical school, his mother gave him Tony Schwartz's New Yorker article and said, oh, you should read this. And he got so enraged, he threw it across the room. He said, you know, because he wanted to be the healer, and that was taking that away from him. A couple years later, he started working with Dr. Sarno, and, you know, when the student was ready, the teacher was there. So, yeah, that's a really important thing to remember, is that when you're ready, the knowledge will come to you. Well, thank you so much, and we're happy to answer a couple more outside, but we have to kind of...
alltheragedoc.com/to-do.